Yeah, I mean, a lot of folks start businesses and they just kind of look at what's hot right now. Oh, we're going to start like a Bitcoin company, or we're going to start a mobile gaming company when that was popular, or whatever. And I think I can tell you from starting a business and growing it to 26 people, if you're not in love with the thing that you're doing, it's going to be super duper hard to get through it because there's certainly highs, but there are also tremendous lows. And so if you're not passionate about the thing, then you're going to struggle.
Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. Sound plays a more important role in human behavior and our decision-making than you may realize. In this podcast, I'll help you understand the art and science of sound so you can better influence others in business and your life. I'm your host, Jodi Krangle. Let's delve a little deeper. Here's the first part of my interview with Mike Kadin. My next guest is the founder and CEO of RedCircle, a platform that equips podcasters with strong tools to support their efforts to advance, make money, and gain attention. Through his experience building RedCircle's technology and growing the company's customer base, he's had the unique experience of working with thousands of podcasters and advertisers, from the smallest marketers to the largest publishers in the space. He brings his technical background and expertise in the podcasting industry together to help move the audio advertising space forward for independent creators. His name is Mike Kadin, and while this might sound a little meta, we've covered this subject before, I think it'll be really useful and encouraging for you if you have a podcast of your own. And if you don't yet have a podcast, maybe you should consider it. Come on in, the water's nice. As always, if you have questions for my guest, you're welcome to reach out through the links in the show notes. And if you have questions for me, visit audiobrandingpodcast.com, where you'll find a lot of ways to get in touch. Plus, subscribing to the newsletter will let you know when the new podcasts are available. And if you'd consider it, I'd love to hear what you think of the podcast. You can leave a review that I'd love to feature on future podcasts, either in written or in voice format from the podcast's main page. And now, here's my interview with Mike Kadin. So how are you doing today, Mike?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I really appreciate your coming on the show today. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I like to start off these interviews with asking you about if you have an early memory of how sound moved you. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think the earliest memories that I have of sound and where I felt it in an emotional way is actually in video games.
Oh, yeah, I can sympathize.
I mean, those are some of the earliest memories I have in general. And I remember, music that went along with certain games or sound effects that went along with certain games. Everything from Mario to, Duck Hunt to different games on Sega Genesis. And I remember, spending a lot of time in front of those machines as a kid. And then to this day, I'll be walking around and I'll hear something outside, or I'll hear a bird make a noise or something. And all of a sudden, some old jingle from a video game I haven't played since I was 7, will pop right back into my consciousness. And these were, important for me as a cool, creative place to play as a kid. And I remember them super well.
Yeah, it's quite amazing how incredible these memories can be and bring you right back to the spot where you were playing at that moment. Like, I don't know how long ago, 20 years ago? I don't know. It's longer than that for me. But
a little bit longer for me as well.
Yeah. So, it's amazing how sound can transport us to right back to that moment. It's almost like you're time traveling.
Yeah, exactly. I was on TikTok a month or two ago and, came randomly across some account that showed old video games. And this song I hadn't heard since I was 7, I just started singing along every single note as it played. I hadn't seen this video game since then, but somewhere, and I don't remember what color my shoes were when I was 7. I don't remember the stories that we read in class, but this music is sort of burned in a very special way.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So sound has this huge ability to do that, to transport us back to that moment, to induce memory too, to be remembered, which I think is so important. But going from the video games to
Sure.
where you are right now. So you're involved in a lot of podcasting and ads for podcasts. That's the idea, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So how how did you get into that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm the founder of a company called RedCircle. We're a podcast advertising technology company. Sort of by accident is the real answer. I mean, I've been a huge fan of podcasts as a listener for forever. All the way back to when podcasting was first beginning on my, iPod. That's why they call it podcasting. And so I've been a listener for forever. And even as a kid, I started listening to books on tape to fall asleep at night with, a Walkman under my pillow. So I've always been a guy that wants to be told stories. And I was working at a big technology company, and I wasn't really happy with the job and the fact that I was at this giant megacorp. And I started writing some code to build a podcast technology, platform on the side, sort of for fun, sort of to get my skills up as a coder before going into the interview room at other companies. And over time, I just slowly became increasingly obsessed with the side project until I found myself up at 2 a.m, researching the industry, coding away and sort of obsessed. And that's sort of how the company was born. So sort of an accident. I didn't pick the podcasting market as a place to build a business, or I didn't have incredible expertise prior to starting the business in this game. But over the last 5 years or so, while we've been building this company, I've learned, so much and connected with so many creators and audio advertisers. That's just been an incredible experience. So yeah, not exactly intentional, and but really glad to have chosen it because it's such an amazing, growing and industry filled with passion and energy.
There's something to be said for finding it by accident too, because that's the passion, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of folks start businesses and they just kind of look at what's hot right now. Oh, we're going to start like a Bitcoin company, or we're going to start a, mobile gaming company when that was popular, or whatever. And I think I can tell you from starting a business and growing it to 26 people, if you're not in love with the thing that you're doing, it's going to be super duper hard to get through it, because there's certainly highs, but there are also tremendous lows. And so if you're not passionate about the thing, then, you're going to struggle.
Yeah, that can be said about pretty much anything, actually, including podcasting. Yeah. You better really love your podcast or it's not going to continue.
Yeah, a lot of people don't make it past, episode 10 or even episode 1. And so, you have to find something and to actually generate an audience and to build a following that's significant. And, if you want to earn money on it or whatever it is your goals are, to achieve that, you've really got to build. And that takes time. It's just about building great content for a long time.
Definitely. Yeah. And we're at 150 right here for this podcast. So, so I must have a passion for it.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. And I'm curious, have you had a podcast of your own? Like, do you make a podcast?
We don't, everybody tells us we're supposed to have it, but it's almost cliche at this point, a podcast company with a podcast. Sort of everybody has one. So instead, I love to go on other folks' shows and chat about what they're up to and discuss the industry and audio in general.
Well, that's what we're doing here. So yeah. Congrats. You did what you set out to do. That's great. Yeah. So as far as advertising is concerned, because I know that you guys deal with that, pretty much exclusively, how do you think this benefits the creators who are advertising on these shows? Like, what is the benefit of people using your service to advertise on podcasts?
Yeah, you mean for advertisers?
Yeah.
So the main thing that makes RedCircle interesting and unique is that we're really focused on host-read advertising, which means the host of the show is the one who's reading the ad. And, there's all kinds of reasons why brands are after that. And what we do is we provide technology that enables you to be able to deploy campaigns where, 50, 100 or more podcasts are reading an ad for your brand. And a lot of times people think about host read and they really focus on okay, the host is reading the ad. That's part of it. But really what makes those unique is that we encourage brands to give a set of talking points and not a word for word script, so that hosts can kind of use their own voice, not just its timbre and their dialect, but also kind of the manner in which they create content, the sort of words they use, the way they explain things, whether it's humorous or serious. All of these things, are what make a host-read ad sort of native and unique to the podcast that you love and that you listen to. And so a lot of brands are after that sort of endorsement style advertising, and our platform enables that to be done without, a million spreadsheets and emails and checks in the mail and pulling your hair out. You can use our technology to do the same.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good thing that people are going to need because, podcasters have enough to worry about.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, on the podcaster side, just imagine you're doing 2 brand deals every week on your podcast and just trying to keep organized around scripts and what's due on what day and providing reporting back to the advertiser, all this stuff we tried to do without the technology. And as a computers guy, I was ready to lose my mind and just sort of started building this stuff to keep us organized. And that eventually became the advertising side of the platform.
I could just imagine. Yeah, what a nightmare.
I know that we're all dealing with a lot of stuff these days, so I particularly wanted to acknowledge those that have taken the time to leave honest reviews of this podcast. Like Elaine Grant, who called the show insightful, practical, eye-opening. As a veteran public radio producer and host, she says, and now an entrepreneur running a podcast consultancy, I thought I knew about the world of audio. Truth is, I knew just a small slice of this big and important world. I've learned so much from every episode. I need to re-listen and furiously take notes. I can't recommend audio branding highly enough. Thank you for taking the time to leave your comment, Elaine. It means so much to me. And now, back to the show.
I'm curious about something because you mentioned host-read ads, and of course that is a great way to connect the listeners to the product or service, of course, and it does lend itself to the voice of the host. It's the podcast itself endorsing this thing. But have you found a really big difference between host-read ads and not host-read ads? Have you measured the metrics of that?
We haven't, but actually just this past week, the folks from Sounds Profitable, Brian Barletta and Tom Webster, they have a media outlet for that's focused on podcast advertising. They just released a study that measured this in great detail. They took a podcast and they measured and they randomly deployed a typical sort of endorsement style host read ad, another ad that was in the voice of the host, but had been sort of scripted out in advance. So they were sort of, more reading it word for word. And then the third group got a announcer read ad, an ad produced by the show's producer. And they measured the outcomes, and it performed exactly as you would expect, which is that the host read ads were the best. The announcer read ads were still very good, but not as good. And the difference between, sort of off the cuff host read style versus, pre-written host read style was noticeable, but not huge. So, best performer was like creative host read, slightly worse was scripted host read, and then announcer read, still really good, but several percentage points lower in terms of brand recall by the listeners surveyed. So, long story short, these host read ads are super powerful, but if you say you're doing a pharmaceutical company and you have 10 lines of disclaimers to do, or you have a very complicated product that requires, extremely specific explanation, or you want to brand the sound in some way, or you have an audio product, you want to play clips from your audio. There's lots of reasons why you might not want to do host read. You can still get great performance out of those. And that's, really great results from the study, which says host read's great, but all of podcast advertising is great.
Yeah. And of course, growing all the time, which, is good for all of us.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice for a podcaster to make money, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what the business is designed to do. We look around the industry and we see, Joe Rogan or the guys from SmartList or whatever with these tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in in contracts. But if you look around the podcast ecosystem and see where most of the listening is happening, it's happening on shows like this one. It's happening on middle class podcasts just as much as it's happening on the top. In fact, if you look at the very top of the market, the top couple thousand shows, it's about 35% of the audience. And then in the middle, shows with anywhere from a couple hundred listeners to, say 100,000 listeners, that's 50% of the listening. And then the rest is down on the several million podcasts that are down the long tail from there. We believe this middle class set of podcasters, deserves to be rewarded for their hard work. But B, we believe the authenticity of the relationship between the host and their audience on these middle class shows that are not over commercialized is a stronger connection than that with, say Joe Rogan or Michael Barbaro or whoever is in the largest podcast. And so our view is that these middle class creators are deserving of being rewarded just as much as everyone else.
So what would your advice be to independent creators who want to make money from their podcast? Is there a reason that they should consider RedCircle?
Sure. There's lots of different places where you can choose to host, distribute, and monetize your podcasts. Really what it comes down to, and if you think about hosting, which is where a podcaster uploads their content to be distributed to Apple and Spotify, there's 30 or more different options. So there's lots of choice out there. Everyone has its own distinct set of bells and whistles. And so it really depends on what you're after and what you're looking to do. There are great podcast hosting companies that will have integrated guest booking software, for example, right? If that's how you monetize is by sort of doing interviews or something like that, then RedCircle is probably not for you. There are other companies that focus on, say, listener payments. We actually have a listener payments solution that's similar to, say, Patreon as well on RedCircle, but there are some companies that are fully devoted to that. And if that's the only thing that you're going to do, or you have, say, video content, or you want to interact with your fans in a social context, maybe Patreon is better for you. But if you're looking to do host-read advertising and you want to connect it to the data that you get from your hosting provider, there's nobody else that's sort of put together a system similar to ours. So if that's sort of what you're after, we of course do listener payments and programmatic advertising as well. But host-read is really what makes us unique and different in the game.
So how does someone sign up? Like, what's the procedure usually when they sign up? You're actually providing hosting. It's not just the ads.
Correct. Yeah. What makes us able to dramatically decrease the friction and keep podcasters and advertisers organized is the fact that we do dynamically inserted audio. So when you record an ad read, you record your ad read separately, and then we insert it into your podcast at the points where you tell us to do that. And that really takes the friction down. When you get an ad deal from us, it just says, hey, here's the script, here's how much money you're going to make, here's the dates, are you in or are you out? You click yes, you record, you upload it. And that will take care of the rest, reporting, paying you in the bank account once we get paid, all the kind of complexities of the back office. In order to do that dynamic insertion and make everything simple for everybody, we have to be the one who's actually serving your audio to the end user. A lot of people don't realize when you press play in Spotify or Apple or wherever, it's quite different than YouTube. Some third-party company like RedCircle or a hosting company is actually delivering you that audio file directly to your phone. It doesn't come from Apple, it doesn't come from Spotify. So what companies that do dynamic insertion do is we actually stitch together that audio file right on the fly, right in the moment when the listener hits play, in order to insert the relevant advertising or whatever other campaigns might be running. So yeah, in order to do all that fun stuff, you have to host your podcast with us. And the good news is that switching from one hosting company to another is not a massive endeavor. It's bread and butter for what our business does, and the app tries to make it really simple. And you can sign up, and the basic tiers, which include advertising, are free. And you can port your podcast over from somewhere else, and the app will walk you through it. And then if you have enough downloads, we can help you to start to monetize if you're interested.
That sounds great. So what kind of numbers are people looking at to be able to monetize? What numbers do you need?
Yeah, so we allow for listener payments style monetization at any size. So if you want to just collect a couple bucks from your fans, you can do that if you have one listener. But until you get up to about 500 downloads per week, that's when the system will automatically invite you into the ad platform. And that's not really about where the advertising demand is, because we can monetize one download with our programmatic advertising, but it's more about like whether it's worth it for all parties involved. At sizes lower than that, the fees for us just to make payouts start to exceed the amount of money that's available.
I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that sounds, I would think that sounds doable for some people. As far as growing a podcast is concerned, because, to have that 500 downloads a week is not necessarily easy.
Right.
Are there any things that you would suggest that someone do to grow a podcast? You've probably talked about this on RedCircle many times.
Yeah, we think about it a lot. It's the number one thing actually we get asked for, because, not everybody's in the middle class yet, and folks want to figure out how to get there. And, the first answer, which maybe sounds obvious, but I think is not the first thing people say when we talk about this topic, is the first thing that you need to do to grow your podcast is to create a really good podcast. If you put in a lot of time, energy, or dollars into trying to bring new listeners to your show, you may succeed. But if the show is not compelling, doesn't bring listeners back to listen again, or doesn't have high audio quality, it's not a pleasant experience to listen to.
I'm a little biased in that matter. Yeah.
I could understand that. I am too. I think over the course of the pandemic, I started listening to all these podcasts where the production quality was amazing. And then all of a sudden, it went to AirPods mode. And that's just kind of become like allowed over the last couple of years. And I'm hoping that will sort of make its way back. But yeah, that's the first thing for growing your pod. That's the most important, is that it needs to be good. People need to want to listen to it, and they need to want to come back and listen again. And in addition to that, there's lots of different ways that you can work on your show to help push the audience into your podcast. A couple different things that we've seen that can be successful. First of all, you can run cross promotions, and that's kind of considered one of the most powerful ways to move the audience around. And we have the data to show that that's the case. RedCircle actually has a cross promotions automation where you can partner with another podcaster, exchange a little 30-second promotional clip for your show. Both parties kind of get to turn the key and approve the ad, and then RedCircle automatically inserts the ad into both podcasts and then takes it out. You can go out and reach out to podcasts yourself if you're not on RedCircle, or you're just interested in partnering with someone directly. And that's a good amount of work, but it can be shown to be really powerful if you can create cross promotions with podcasts that have similar engaged audiences. We've done a bunch of experiments with those. We've done some learnings, like pre-roll is better than mid-roll, which is surprising. We've got learnings that the closer the overlap is between the content categorization of the two shows, the more powerful the ad is at moving audience between the things. Some of these are obvious. Mid-roll versus pre-roll, maybe not so obvious.
Yeah, that actually is a surprise. I would think that people would want to get to the meat of the episode really quickly, as opposed to being delayed.
Yeah, I think I have a view on it, but I'm not sure it's accurate. But this is my theory. With regular advertising, the wisdom is that mid-roll is better, because you're going to hear the advertisement and you're going to not have your phone in your hand. You're going to be like less likely to fast forward, and you're going to be engaged with the content, so you sort of forget that that there's an ad break happening. Whereas in the beginning, right when you start the episode, if you have your phone in your hand, it's very easy to hit fast forward. On the other hand, the call to action for subscribing to a podcast is rather complex. It's not like about brand, and it's not about what soap you're going to pick when you end up at the store later. It actually requires you to take out your phone and search for a podcast name in the podcast app of your choosing. And so perhaps, actually in the beginning, when your phone may still be in your hand, it's actually good for cross promotional ads. That's my theory. I don't know if that's why.
It sounds interesting. And actually, I kind of wonder if people listening to that intro are wondering if they're listening to the right podcast. And so they just keep on listening.
Yeah, I mean, it's why it's so important, in any advertising, but especially in these cross promotional ones. You only get 30 seconds to make an impression on the listener. It needs to be compelling. It needs to be unique. It needs to be, obvious that you're listening to a promotion, so that people aren't confused, like you said. It needs to have high quality audio. The maybe some background music that isn't too jarring. There's lots of wisdom about how to create one of these. But again, if you're going to go through all the trouble of doing a cross promotion, which can be a lot of work, best to make sure that the ad that's on the other end of that is compelling and can actually move users or move listeners. The other thing for growth that we have seen be successful is the idea of engaging with your existing audience. So, tons of studies have shown that one of the primary vectors for podcast growth is just through word of mouth. And so some of the podcasts that I listen to, that I've been listening to for a long time, they will say a direct sort of call to action to your fans, each time you do the episode. Hey, if you want to help the show and support the show, you can subscribe and give us $5 a month on our RedCircle page here. But you can also support us if you don't have the money by just telling a friend. It helps us grow the show. It helps us support the work that we're doing, blah, blah, blah. And those kinds of calls to action to your audience to help by telling a friend, I think can also be really powerful. Sometimes people, think like, oh, if I ask for money or if I ask to tell a friend, I'm kind of like a panhandler for my podcast. But I think people get it. I think they understand that you're putting a lot of hard work and energy into this thing. And you're hoping to get some value back from the listener for the value that you provide, whether that's in dollars or sweat or whatever thing that can be helpful with.
Sure. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. I love the way you put that, actually, that they could, actually help out. And if you can't afford to pay anything, that's perfectly fine. Just, share it with someone. I kind of love that idea.
Are you looking for ways to improve your company's or podcast's impact? You'd be surprised how powerful the use of an intentional audio branding strategy can be. Want to know more? I have a free downloadable PDF that gives you my 5 tips for implementing an intentional audio strategy at voiceoversandvocals.com/audio-branding-strategy. That location does ask to put you on a mailing list, just to send you updates on when the new podcasts come out. But if you really don't want to give your email out, I understand. Just contact me directly. My email is all over my website, and I'll make sure you get that PDF without needing to sign up anywhere. If you do sign up, though, you also get access to a resources section called The Studio, where I have videos, white papers, and PDFs, discounts from my guests, and snippets of audio from my guests that no one else gets to hear. So maybe it's worth your while. Totally up to you. And of course, if you're looking for voiceovers, you can get in touch with me about that too. Now, back to the podcast.
I mean, listen, some of the podcasts that are come to RedCircle and have not succeeded in monetizing before, they could have 10 or 20,000 people listening. 20,000 people is the number of people that fit inside the Oracle arena that the Warriors play in. I mean, it's an insane, these people are coming back week after week, right, to listen to this podcast. And it's insane the influence that a creator can have and how little reward there is for that on the other end. And so it's not out of line to ask for value back for the value you're generating. If you're creating an entertaining or educational or engaging experience for 20,000 people, gosh, you should be able to say, hey, can you tell a friend I've been working really hard on this thing. And I think people respect and understand that.
Yeah. It's definitely a passion project for most people. And being able to monetize that just a little bit would be super helpful. So yeah, I really appreciate your talking about this. And out of curiosity, do you have any like actual case studies that you've done over at RedCircle that show how this works?
We do. We've worked with brands of all shapes and sizes, the smallest of brands that are testing the space, or small podcast networks as well that are looking to grow their audience, that are going to pay for promotional ads across our platform, down to $10,000 of spend and seeing real results on the other side. And then, we've got larger advertisers, the traditional ones that you might hear about in the space that have tried in different different, running ads on larger, more traditional podcast networks and getting, $80 to $100 cost per acquisition of their customers, and then coming and playing around in this more diverse and creative middle class space where we're doing $24, cost per acquisitions for this. It's a major delivery app. What we've seen is that we believe these middle class creators have a lot more to give than the largest creators who are just sort of phoning it in.
That's a good point. Yeah. And it sounds like your network is pretty spread out over a whole bunch of different types of podcasts. So there's hopefully something for everyone. That would be the idea.
Yeah, I've been amazed by the diversity and creativity of all the audio creators that are out there. We have all kinds of normal stuff, I don't know if it counts as normal, but I would say there's a lot of true crime podcasts.
Don't say normal.
That's not normal, but
Yeah.
But there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of podcast creators that make amazing true crime content. But then we have all kinds of stuff. We got religious content. We've got the two guys in the basement screaming about sports. We've got one guy who uses our dynamic insertion technology to randomly choose audio clips to create almost a choose your own adventure in audio. Lots of just amazing creativity that people have put together. And it's so cool to build a platform that allows these folks to express their creativity in this media. I think audio altogether has been having a renaissance over the pandemic. The microphones sold out on Amazon. Everybody was stuck at home with something to say. But also there's the slower growth that's been happening for years and years where, podcasting is, instead of making a diorama in middle school, kids are making podcasts, and this style of expression is about to become even more mainstream than it is today.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, it's becoming the way that people reach out into the ether. I mean, because the barrier to entry is so much lower, especially now. And it's amazing to see all the different voices that are going out there. I've been really privileged to see some of them and to have some people on the show who are helping to produce them. So it's a lot of it's really amazing. And I'm super interested in how you're seeing this as well, because you're on the forefront of this as well.
This has been part 1 of our interview. I hope you'll tune in next week for part 2. Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, why not tell a friend about this podcast? It's available in all the usual locations. Until next time.